So my name is Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat. I run the GamesBeat conference, which will take place in LA next year on April 28th and 29th. And it's going to be at 2-Bit Circus again, so in LA. And I'm going to have my panel introduce themselves, starting with Michael Pachter.
Michael Pachter, I'm a stock market analyst, so I know very little about anything except in television, Amico is the bomb.
Hi, I'm Mike Futter. I'm actually the outlier on this panel. I am...
No, you're not.
Huh? I'm not?
No, you're not.
Okay, I'm not the outlier on this panel. I'm the author of the Game Dev Business Handbook and the Game Dev Budgeting Handbook. I'm also a freelance writer covering business news, legal news in the industry.
Hi, I'm Mike DeLaet. I'm the founder and CEO of Rogue Games. We're a game publisher based in LA with offices in San Francisco and Seattle, and been in games for 15 plus years now.
Hi, I'm Jim Ying with CVCapita. We advise on later stage investment and M&A deals.
My name is Stuart Drexler. I run a mobile games indie studio as well as a publishing house called Jago Studios here, based here in LA. We have the belief that everybody wants to laugh while they're playing with their friends in their mobile games.
All right, our first topic for debate is going to be loot boxes, right? All right, and so who wants to tackle just explaining loot boxes and why?
Sure. You know, as a journalist, you know, this is a topic that we're looking at very closely. The idea, you know, loot boxes, gotcha mechanics started in free-to-play games. They've bled their way over into premium games. And there is a lot of discussion right now about whether or not they skirt the line towards gambling. And you know, if you look at the way loot boxes work, when you purchase one, when you open one up, it's not just you click the button and all of a sudden you see what you've got. The loot box shakes, there's lights, there's sounds, they explode, and then finally they land right in front of you. And a lot of the way loot boxes work, according to some psychologists, is very similar to the way slot machines work. So there is a lot of alarm right now, and I guess we'll talk about whether or not that's founded, about whether loot boxes are an abusive or a non-ethical form of monetization. There were just some workshops that the FTC held, and I think that one of the conversations around this is whether or not the video game industry walked itself into potential government regulation by not failing to self-regulate in a way that that the public deemed fit.
So does anybody want to debate his laying out of the facts?
Oh, facts? Yeah. I have a recovering lawyer, and when I say lawyer, I passed the bar 38 years ago, and I practiced for about 20. So I actually was a lawyer. The term gambling in the law requires a wager. So buying a loot box is very definitely spending money. There's consideration for a chance, and there's very clearly a chance outcome. To win something, absolutely, of value. And that's the trick. When you win something in a loot box, does it have value? And so far, only one court has said yes. They said that if you win a chance to play the game longer, if you're in a slot game and you win more coins in the loot box, then that has value. It's the only legal opinion ever.
Which court?
It was Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in Utah. The judge was 78 years old, Mormon, which just means he never gambled in his life. And I don't mean that, nothing bad about Mormons. I just mean he's not a gambler for sure. He doesn't go to Vegas. And it was based on Washington state law that was really wishy-washy about the word value. But any state that has legal gambling, and California does, any place with Indian casinos has it, value really means you're going to get back something that could be converted to cash. And if the game itself doesn't allow you to sell the item you win in the loot box for cash, then there's a very solid legal argument that you didn't gamble. Gambling mechanics, 100%. Addictive, 100%. You don't want people to do, you don't want your kid to do it, of course. But if you call it gambling, it's just illegal if the state law says that's illegal. So these morons in Hawaii, the Hawaii legislature, who decided they were going to sponsor a bill calling it gambling, That just means they thought that they were going to legalize it and limit it to people over 21, except gambling isn't legal in Hawaii under their constitution. So people over 21 aren't allowed to gamble either. So the reason I call these guys morons, they're unfamiliar with Hawaii law and they're responsible for writing laws. So it's a really odd topic, but...
Two questions I want to pose back to you before I hand the mic over to somebody else. One is Steam Marketplace, where there are games that have loot boxes and you've got a platform-wide system in which you can then sell those items for money.
Washington, like I said, the state of Washington is funky and has its real funky rules. Steam is really stupid to allow that to happen, and they're really vulnerable because it probably is gambling.
And when I mentioned skirting that line, getting very close, and that's kind of where I was talking about. The other thing is, we're looking at United States law. Obviously, there's international law that's affected EA, Belgium in particular.
And the Belgian law is very clear that that was gambling. So, you have to look at where. And so what was EA's solution? They pulled FIFA out of Belgium, not available, and they had a spike in Dutch servers and French servers, and they couldn't figure out why. It was all the Belgian players just logged in to French or Dutch servers. They lost no money. Belgium collected no money, and I personally think it's a stupid issue to approach that way. Different to say ethical. Ethically, it's a terrible thing. Ethically, somebody's going to lose their house because they're addicted to buying these loot boxes. But it's not gambling. It's gambling mechanics, and you can outlaw it. You can just say you can't do this. But it takes essentially a federal law, because it's how do you outlaw FIFA loot boxes in California and not in Nevada? Same thing. Californians will go to the Nevada server and still buy the loot boxes. So it's just an interesting topic.
I was going to say, I do think it is gambling. And I think it's unfortunate because people conflate free-to-play and a lot of the free-to-play mechanics with gacha boxes and loot boxes when it is, in my mind, two different things. Free-to-play mechanics, it is a digital good, but you know what you're buying, just like when you buy a physical good, you know what you're buying, and hey, if you want to apply $100 to a digital good, all right, I myself have spent hundreds of dollars in video games, that's fine. But it's another thing when you're spending money on a chance to get something and you have no idea what it is going to be, just like when you go to a casino and you're rolling the dice, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. At least then, you theoretically know the odds. If you look into it, you can find out the odds. For many of these games, you actually don't even know the odds. And there is increasing legislation or guidance that they're starting to reveal what these odds are, which I think is a good thing in the right direction. But the fact that I'm not going to say not regulated, but the fact that it is just kind of the Wild West for these types of loot boxes is concerning.
So is it gambling when you buy a baseball card trading pack? Because you don't know what's inside. And there might be cards that are valued at 10 cents, and there might be cards that are valued at $100.
And then do we solve this problem simply by forcing the companies to actually disclose the odds and tell you what's inside exactly?
Is it gambling when you enter a contest on the back of a cereal box? Remember doing that?
Of course.
Exactly the same thing. And the law is very clear that, that they carved out baseball cards. I don't know why, but they knew that those existed, so they said these are okay.
Yeah, but it's not there. There are many, many types of blind pack. I mean, we're doing a Garbage Pail Kids game. It's a blind pack card trading pack from get-go.
Yeah, and one thing I'd say is Apple has done some pretty good job of making developers disclose the odds in these games. So at least you know in advance what you're getting yourself into. You have a 2% chance of getting a 4-star card versus a 3-star card. So people do know in general what they're getting themselves into. And now, from a business standpoint, I love gotcha boxes, loot boxes. From a consumer standpoint, I hate it, right? So there's always a fine line in what you do from a business standpoint versus a consumer standpoint.
I guess my question around, and this came out of the FTC workshops as well, you suddenly have publishers who are like, yes, we're going to disclose our odds a little bit better. And they should. But my question is there any evidence that disclosure of the odds actually impacts the way someone spends money? Or is it just performative, like putting a warning on the side of a cigarette pack? Where it's like, yeah, I know the warning's there. There's 4 different kinds of warnings. Have I ever read them? I mean, I don't smoke, but is someone going to stop smoking because one day they pick up the pack and go, oh my gosh, this is terrible?
I mean, I'm not an expert on the evidence. I can say that every state lottery discloses the odds, and I don't think that anybody ever thinks about it when they play a lottery. It's like $1 and I might win $500 billion. You know, people just say, I know I only have 1 in a trillion chance, but 500 billion. And they think it's a great deal. You know, everybody knows when they play the lottery, they don't have a chance of winning, but we all still do it.
I think this does get into the gray area of, you know, to what degree does self-decision making, are you responsible for your own actions? And I think everyone would probably agree, all right, gotcha boxes should be, you know, they shouldn't be possible in kids' games, but then for an adult who can make their own decisions, should they be able to play this type of game, knowing what, even now that they know what the odds are?
Yeah, and I can say at my last company, we did disclose the odds, and we were definitely worried it was going to impact revenue in a negative way once we did that, and it didn't impact it at all. Like, people knew what the odds were. We had to show it to them right in the face, and they still bought just as many as they did before.
And you probably had fewer customer complaints.
I
So,
don't
so
think
you
it changes.
guys, are loot boxes sufficiently regulated at this point already?
What do you mean by regulated? Do you mean externally or internally?
You know, I think there's you know, the voluntary things that say the platform owners have done, like Apple, forcing companies to disclose. You know, they did that to probably head off legislation, I guess, but it's just as effective, I guess.
Well, I guess what I would say in response to this is, if you look at actions the industry has taken in the past to circumvent or preempt government intervention, the ESRB is one. Putting ratings on boxes when there was a moral panic around video game violence. That says, hey, look, we're actually working to educate people. And the ESRB has run education campaigns, you know, and they continue to run education campaigns. I would say that the fact that we've gotten to this point indicates, like, hey, maybe the industry isn't doing enough to self-regulate, and maybe it's time to look at whether or not the ethical nature, and again, this is different than the legal nature, if the ethical nature of loot boxes are causing so many problems and exposing the industry to the risk of government oversight, because once it starts, the risk exposure is huge, then perhaps it's time to find something else. And we're starting to see the phasing out in some games of loot boxes. You know, Fortnite didn't launch, Battle Royale didn't launch with them, but Save the World did, and they're phasing them out of Save the World.
Yeah, there was so when I was at GRI a couple years back, there was a government regulation in Japan where they got rid of Kampu Gacha, which was an either, I don't know, sinister way, if you want to say it, where not only were you rolling for a single item, but you had to gather up multiple items that you had to roll for in order to get the final item. And that they actually legally banned and shut down. But somehow they didn't take the step to regular gacha.
I mean, I think the good news is that, you know, Congress can't even agree on a budget. So the odds of you know, U.S. politicians actually doing anything are almost nil. But I don't think that the game companies want to participate in hearings and have scrutiny of their practices. And of the majors, the only one who makes any real money in loot boxes is EA. I mean, FIFA Ultimate Team is loot boxes. We can talk about Hearthstone card packs. That's a small fraction of what FIFA Ultimate Team is. So they're probably second.
And there's some sort of pushback from consumers against EA, right? We saw that with
Yeah,
Battlefront
and I
2,
don't think,
right?
I mean,
So,
Ultimate
yeah.
Team is cards too.
Yeah.
I actually think anybody who plays a game with cards understands card packs, and that's back to baseball cards. It just, we grow up with that. We understand it. And I actually think most consumers understand what they're getting, but they still whine if they spend $50 and they didn't get the card they wanted.
Yeah.
You know, so
From the press perspective, you know, when we look at this, the sense that you get on social media isn't necessarily the feeling from the entire player base. So you have this vocal minorities like EA is evil, you know, Ultimate Team is evil, and then you look at the revenue associated with it, and it's like, it's not just that it does well, people do love playing those modes, and specifically pick up FIFA, Madden, NHL. They pick up those games for those modes. So we need to be careful about, from a social media perspective, of what we're hearing from a group doesn't necessarily represent the feeling across
Maybe
the
they're
group.
all addicted, which would get us into another topic for debate.
Ooh,
but-
good segue.
So anyway, so we've done 15 minutes on loot boxes so far, and I'm wondering if the audience now would like us to switch to something else. Is there another topic, hot topic for debate that sort of follows the example that we just set with the loot box discussion.
Do you think what Blizzard Activision is doing with Hearthstone and Overwatch, when you've opened X amount of packs, you're guaranteed to get the highest rarity? Do you think that's the route to tackle this? Like,
It's Activision Blizzard and what they're doing with Hearthstone packs and.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing, I play a ton of mobile games, and I literally spent thousands of dollars, and I'm seeing now more and more and more, if you buy this bundle of loot boxes, you're guaranteed to get these 3 or 5 items. So yeah, you feel good. If that's why you're doing it, then you play that bundle and that's why you buy it. Yes, I think that if the desired outcome, if you know that you want a certain character and it's $100, that's your decision. And all the games give you a path to grind it out. I spoke to the Finland Trade Council for games to the U.S. and I was like, because my impression is the Finnish mobile games all do this masterfully, and the rest of the world just can't get their shit together. And I said, why is it? And she goes, we're a social democracy and we believe in fairness. So rich people pay and poor people can grind it out. And I'm like, it's true. If you play Finnish games, you play Supercell, you see it. You actually get why their games work. So yeah, I think what you asked is exactly the right outcome.
The word fairness stands out to me in what you just said, and before you said it, that's all I had in my head, and it goes back to, I mean, I've worked in, before I did what I'm doing now, I've worked in kids media for a very long time, and kids want life to be fair, right? That's really, really important, and I think that inner child in all of us lasts through. So if you keep opening packs and boxes and boxes and boxes and you're not getting what you want, you're gonna be a bit annoyed. So if you have a sense of fairness in it all, and I don't know who's going to regulate that, that's a different story, above my pay grade, then I think you have a system that, again, people are willing to accept. I'll pay that $100, I'll pay that $500, I'll pay that $5,000 as long as I get what I want.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add is these studios definitely have an idea in their head of what a certain rarity of a character is worth. My last studio, we'd say this character is worth $10,000, right? So when you get to a point where this person spent $9,000 in this game, still haven't gotten that person they want, then you can definitely increase the odds dramatically and say, okay, now they get it, right? So there's ways to make that happen, for sure, and they definitely think about that.
All right, raise your hand. Next topic, video game violence. Raise your hand if you want that. All right.
What's the other one?
Addiction, you want that. All right, I guess I would maybe proceed to video game addiction then. Like, everybody knows that the WHO recently decided to classify gaming disorder as a real medical condition, and that sort of sets loose a new debate on whether video games are too addictive or not. So anybody want to tackle a position on that?
Well, I got a 15-year-old boy, and I can say the Fortnite epidemic that's been going around has definitely been annoying to me as a guy who works in the games industry and a kid who plays that nonstop when he's out of school. So I'm trying to tell him, like, you can't play nonstop. You got to, like, do real things in life. But I
But he
work in
could win
games.
$3 million as the Fortnite
You
world
can,
champion.
right?
And that was cool to watch.
Not on mobile, though. He won't be winning if it's on mobile.
No. The interesting thing, there was a lot of outcry against this, and there are some positive aspects of something being classified by the WHO, and one is that it can be diagnosed. So if you have addictive behavior, and that addictive behavior, a child is too young to gamble, let's say, they're not going to be diagnosed with gambling addiction. They're not going to necessarily be diagnosed with substance addiction, but you can identify early on in their life, hey, you are prone to addiction. This is the way your addiction is emerging. Then you have medical professionals who can turn around and lean on that and say, hey, guess what? This is, we can actually then talk about that and start treatment for that, and the insurance will cover it. So in the United States, there's some benefit for that. There's also this misunderstanding that I play 20 hours of video games a week. That means I'm addicted. When really I can play 20, 30, 40 hours a week as long as I get everything else done in my life. I take care of my relationships. I take care of my pets. They eat twice a day. I don't play 40 hours. I wish I could play 40 hours of video games a week. That era of my life has passed. But you can have someone who plays for 2, 3, 5 hours a week, and then they obsess about it. And my son is diagnosed. He's on the ADHD spectrum. He perseverates about the things that he's really interested in. Now, thankfully, it hasn't progressed to a point where it's negatively impacting his schoolwork. He's performing well academically, but it's something we're aware of. So, if you get to the point where, the child is regulated because the parents are saying you're only allowed to play, 5 hours a week of games, and it's still all they're doing is focusing on games. They're then going and read about games on the internet and watching videos about games, even though they're only playing 5 hours a week. Those addictive tendencies might be emerging in other ways. So it's not strictly about how long somebody plays. There's a set of behaviors around that.
I also had to go speak at a community college class for psychiatrists, and they didn't know anything about video games, and they asked me to come explain games to them because they know it comes up in their work. And the way it comes up is through addiction conversations, but also as a source of conflict between kids and parents. And that the parents are always trying to crack down in some way, and they're not understanding why the kid won't cooperate, or why they're having different kinds of family troubles because of this. And the psychiatrists were basically saying that, this is a real thing that we're going to have to deal with in our practices. That's why we want to know about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
It is an interesting time, particularly for this, because there are many factors that kind of bring up this debate right now. One is, I think video games and digital entertainment have gotten to a point where they are very substantive competitors to real life activities. Like we were chatting before, where when we were growing up, you were outdoors playing, and that was probably the most fun you had with friends. Whereas now, for many kids, the most fun that they have is playing Fortnite with their friends. Right? That platform just wasn't available to us when we were kids. Right? Another part is for the game developers. At this point, as metrics driven as a lot of these games are, people are so focused on day 1, day 7, day 30 retention that they're optimizing for those metrics. And if you think about it, those are the types of things that do lend themselves to addiction, because you're literally trying to design the game to get people to come back at regular increments. Right? All of that wasn't possible in early, when there weren't these metrics to track these types of games.
And along those lines, if we're talking about a medical profession that isn't well versed in this, it's like you can say, well, here's how many drinks a week that we look for, right? If you're drinking X, we start to become concerned about that, but we'll look at the other behaviors. Again, it's the same thing. You can have a drink a night, no big deal.
One thing I think, this is what Jim and I were talking about before, games when I was younger were single player only. And so you could beat a game in 30 hours if you sucked, but you didn't have to play it 30 hours in a row. You could play 5 hours a week for 6 weeks and beat the game. And games have migrated now to being almost always multiplayer and social, and they never end. So it's a different type of experience, which also is addictive and brings kids back into it. I get asked this a lot by investors because they're trying to figure out if game companies are bad or good for society. We have 168 hours in the week. And we spend about 40 hours working and about 40 hours sleeping and about 20 hours just getting to and from work, school, eating, showering, doing whatever. That leaves 68 hours that we just fuck around. I mean, that's just, we do. And when I was little, it was playing outside or doing sports and, watching TV and reading occasionally. And our kids are filling that 68 hours with screen time, which might be video games, it might be Snapchat. And, I think Mike made the point. If they're getting everything else done, if they're getting their schoolwork done, if they're working or doing whatever they're supposed to be doing, does work or school for that 40 hours, who cares what they're doing at their time unless it's stopping them developing as humans and keeping them from, socializing properly. I think Snapchat's a bigger threat to society than games. I mean, I do. And
who in the audience limits screen time for their children?
Yeah.
Did your kids hate you?
No.
I don't think it's just about games, right? It is about Snapchat, it's about social media. It's not just about kids, it's about all of us, right? We all have a smartphone in our pocket, and we use it X many hours a day for work, but then we socialize with it, and then we game with it, and then we watch videos with it. We do all these things with it, and you're right. There's a sociocultural aspect of how our society is changing and kids aren't getting outside and all this other stuff that I don't know if we want to get into, but from a quote unquote addiction standpoint, I think it's just a choice of how you want to spend your time. And I don't think that games, there will be a percentage of people who are truly addict or have addictive tendencies, and the rest of us are just really excited about a particular game right now.
And I think there's two things happening here, and it's very similar to video game violence, where the game industry has a sort of a face that it puts out to everybody else, like the mainstream, right? And it doesn't want to accept legal liability here. And so the actual strategy is for violence and for addiction to say, you know what, video games don't cause this stuff, other things cause it. There's no research that links video games to violence, no research that links video games to addiction. And so they have this wall. But I think within the industry, we can actually have this conversation about how do you design a game to be more or less addictive, right? And that's a very practical thing. I think parents and kids also, parents are having these conversations about addiction with their kids every day, right? And so that, sort of unencumbered by this fear of a legal liability, people sort of are intuitively coming upon this subject as a very important one, I guess. And so I don't know if on, two different levels here, whether you want to talk about those two different levels, but maybe is there a way to design games to be more socially acceptable and less addictive?
From my personal experience, I do think there is. So, I played a lot of the heavily social, like Machine Zone type games where there is a lot of social pressure to be on all the time and to participate. So when I was playing, it was Rage of Bahamut, one of the first card battle games. They had, when they had a war going, they had wars every 6 hours, and I would literally set an alarm at like 2 o'clock in the morning to wake up and play this game. And that, I'd say, was definitely addictive behavior. But over time, I figured out you learn this is not healthy, and I deleted the game. Where now I say much of my time playing Clash Royale, where I do think they have a good mechanic of limiting how much you play. Like once you have all the boxes there and you're done with the activities, there's really not much point in playing more. But yet I do play 4 or 5 times a day, but it's not like you can just play the game endlessly.
Yeah, I mean, having worked at Kabam, we definitely would try to limit it, but there's a lot of social pressure to your point that these alliances try to pressure you to play nonstop. They'll literally kick you out of the alliance if you're not playing 15 times a day. And it gets to a point where you have to self-regulate like you did, right? And either delete the game or just quit playing for a while, take a break. And then maybe get to a less pressured alliance that's a little more chill, that's more your speed, right? And I think as game developers, there's ways to do that, right? You turn off some of these features like login calendars and things and social kind of push notifications and things like that will help tone down the constant notifications like, hey, jump in and play, hey, play all the time. And it gets really annoying, right? So either you play and spend tons of money or you don't.
Other comments, thoughts?
I do think that in the long run, the companies that are going to benefit the most are ones that are able to design game mechanics where it does inhibit highly addictive behavior. Because if it is highly addictive, it's not going to be a long-term gameplay. At some point, either they're going to walk away or something's going to cause them to delete the game.
Just a crazy thought, Dean, per your question. Could we do both? Could we create a game that is both addictive and actually good for the planet somehow? I mean, somebody was telling me at lunch today about a browser that if you download it, they plant trees in the Amazon rainforest. So it's getting 250,000 downloads a day free. It's all ad supported.
Yeah, I heard about that. I don't know much about it, but very interesting. So it's another 15 minutes we spent on addiction. Does anybody have another topic for us? Okay, sure. You want to suggest something?
Yeah, I was just curious on the potential for eSports. Do we think it's overhyped, underhyped?
That's a good one. Yeah. eSports, overhyped or underhyped?
eSports is going to be a giant phenomenon on the planet, but the value chain, so who's going to make money off it, is way overhyped. So you've got, everybody wants to be the ESPN of esports, and Activision self-proclaimed that they are. What do they own? They own Overwatch, and Call of Duty. Are those going to be around in 50 years? Are we going to be watching people playing those in 50 years? Maybe. But are we going to be watching people actually playing soccer in 50 years? On the real game? 100%. Football? Unless it causes brain damage, yeah, 100%. So I don't think there's a game yet that has universal appeal, that's easy to understand, that everybody wants to watch. I think there's an amalgamation of games, right? And so a few million people want to watch each game, and when you add them all up, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. And I think esports is largely like a bunch of sports like golf, women's NBA, tennis. They're all interesting sports, but you probably don't watch them all. And if you don't watch golf if you're not a golfer. You might watch tennis because it's easy to understand. Women's NBA, I've never watched a game, and I'm not saying it's bad, I just don't care, don't follow it. I barely watch men's NBA. So, you know, ESPN is good because they have World's Strongest Man and college football and baseball, and they don't care if their audience, if only 1% of their audience watches each sport, it's always on. Where I don't see how Activision with 2 games is ever going to dominate. I think
There's
it's
this
zero
concept
probability.
of Twitch rivals where, you know, they switch the game out that's being played, which is interesting.
Twitch is going to win. I mean, sure. Twitch is the ESPN. They have the audience. You know, and I think the most fascinating thing to me of esports is that there's these celebrity casters. You know, these guys who are truly great, you know, just came out of nowhere. I mean, what were they doing before they were Twitch casters? Some of the guys are like television announcers, and they're really polished and really great, and some are just really fun to watch. I mean, Ninja's good because he's fun, you know, would he be a good TV announcer? Probably not. Good TV esports announcer, but he wouldn't be a good basketball announcer. So I love that there's a whole new thing. So before you're going to be Booga and win your 3 million playing Fortnite, you have a better chance of being Ninja, you know, and making, 50 million. So, but again, it's a big phenomenon, but think of it as all sports as opposed to individual games, because there isn't going to be a game for a long time that's as big as NFL football is, or FIFA soccer is for real people to watch. It just, I can't think of that game yet. And I'm not going to watch people playing Candy Crush. Like, no interest in that at all.
What I think about it is, it gets interesting when there's enough of an audience base where there's people willing to secure the broadcast rights. And because if you look at the real sports, that's where they're getting all their money. It's not about selling the merchandise. It's not about ticket sales. It's when the ESPNs or the ABCs are willing to pay millions and billions of dollars to get the broadcast rights. And then that's when that kind of floods the ecosystem with money. And right now, it's still, my sense is it's still pretty far away from that. And so all the valuations that the teams are getting and all the companies that are trying to sell themselves as a critical part of the esports ecosystem, all of those valuations are inflated, and they're all banking that they're going to be able to survive until that point, and they'll be one of the leaders, and so they'll get a slice of that pie.
It sure is going to be interesting to watch the whole Echo Fox spot in LCS and what happens with that, because
how much is that worth?
Exactly, and what is that valuation going to do to the rest of the spots? Obviously.
So I guess the Kotaku story on this subject was actually very interesting to read. I think anybody who's interested in esports should probably go check that story out about sort of overinflated numbers that are being used to overhype esports now. Whether it's true or not as far as being on the money about esports, I think there's debate, but I don't know. Do you guys have any opinions about the actual numbers being thrown around, about the potential? Right. And the other thing that's interesting about esports, though, is that this is what kids use in their debates with parents, right? About addiction, right? It's like, what do you mean, Mom? What do you mean I'm addicted to this game? Like, haven't you seen that, Fortnite, I could win $3 million in the World Championships? I could make a money living.
I work for a stock brokerage company, and our CEO called me up and he goes, is there a chance we can get some of these esports millionaires to invest their money with us? And I said, man, where do you even get a list of esports millionaires? So of course, instantly I get this top 200 esports earners, or actual competitors. and there were 200 of them, and of the top 200, 8 were from the United States. And I said, we would be better off going after the women's NBA for invest, because I know there are more millionaires in the women's NBA than there are in esports in the United States. And then we should go after golf next, because I know there's at least 250 golfers that make over $1 million a year. It's just like, it's really not a big deal. And yet, look at all these billionaires that buy Call of Duty World League teams and Overwatch League teams. And it's because Bobby Kotick is a billionaire, and he's got his club of billionaire boys that he gets together, and he's convinced them that they're going to make more billions. And so they're trying it, but he really did position it like, this is the NFL. You're getting the Cleveland Browns in 1930, and 50 years later it's going to be worth $2 billion. Maybe, or 50 years later, Overwatch isn't a thing. Yeah. So I mean, I just don't understand. If you bought the LA team for any game Activision ever made in perpetuity, I could see that. I could totally see that's worth 60 million bucks or whatever, because Activision is going to be around in 50 years. But not Call of Duty. Like, if EA ever got their act together and made Battlefield, well every year, Call of Duty would get cut in half.
So I still think the kids have another winning argument here, which is, everybody knows that AI is going to wipe out so many jobs. Like maybe a third of all jobs could be wiped out by AI, right? So why should I go to college and study computer science?
Most of those jobs are truck drivers.
Why don't I instead play video games, and in fact get paid to play video games and create some career that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago? Like, say, being a Twitch player, or streaming, a YouTuber, or an eSports star. Why can't I do that? And that's my career, Mom and Dad. Why don't you guys let me play video games?
Well, there's two paths there. There's the esports athlete. I mean, you have degradation of the human body that happens in esports just like it does in physical sports. You can only, your Twitch reflexes are going to degrade. You hit 20, 25, man, you're getting run over by kids, who are 10 years younger than you.
Is there a Dota player over 25?
I don't
that's good.
think so.
Yeah.
Okay, Dad. So I'm gonna win $1 million. I'm gonna quit after 5 years, and then I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna become a lawyer, and I'm gonna work for the Overwatch teams. That's my career path.
I mean, I would have that conversation, be like, all right, show me your talent. Show me the beautiful thing about esports is that Fortnite had open qualifiers. Go ahead, show me how you do, and we'll have another conversation about it. The other path is, I'm going to be a streamer. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about realistically what a streamer's life is like. You think you get to sit back and play video games, but no, you've got to worry about building and managing your community. You've got to eventually worry about having moderators that you trust and can turn the keys over to. You have to have a streaming schedule. You think it's all fun and games, man, but it's a job. Like, it is an actual job, and people get burnt out doing it.
Sorry, go on.
You want me to?
Well, so I have 2 boys, 8 and 12, and my 12-year-old is very much into Fortnite, and he played Fortnite for quite a while, and then he watched streamers on Fortnite, and I let him watch and listen with headphones, because God knows what these guys were saying that I didn't want my 8-year-old to hear about. But he's bored of it now. If he ever came to me and said, "Dad, I want to be a streamer," I'd say, all the things you just said, and go for it. And you're basically becoming an entrepreneur. You're becoming a marketer. You're becoming a media creator. There's a ton of great things in there. And he'd be asking me, "Well, can you help?" I'm like, "Oh, I'll help a little bit. You got to do it. You got to want it badly enough." One other thing though, I have a personal story, because a good friend of mine, his son, this is now 5-6 years ago, he said to me, "Listen, I don't know what to do. My son, Nick, he wants to become a professional League of Legends player." And I'm like, "Kid playing video games? Are you kidding me?" And I'm in the industry, so we had to talk about it. Long story short, the next time I saw him, he said, "I've decided it's going to be okay. I'm going to let him do it." Well, he went and became a League player, and he was one of the best in the world for a while. And he was, they were paying him 6 figures, and putting him up in, here, and then, hiring Korean players to kick him off the team because this one's better, and it was just cutthroat mayhem. And this poor kid, who's now in his 20s, is trying to piece his life back together because he didn't know how to take this kind of pressure and this kind of intensity. You throw 5 or more, whatever, teenagers in a house together, and they've never lived on their own before, and they've never seen this kind of money before, and they're being asked to play the game for 14 hours a day, and if they're not playing enough, and they're not playing well enough, they're out. It does some things to your head.
Yeah, and the other piece of that is who's the adult in the room, and who is helping these kids learn how to manage their money and learn how to do all these things. There are some great services out there that will teach people like, hey, here's the basics of setting up your streaming schedule, and understanding like, do you want to be a variety streamer? Do you want to be, do you have a specific game that you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I went through this with my 15-year-old kid, and I told him, okay, we'll set up a YouTube channel for you. We'll at least stream on Twitch, and he did it. And the funny thing is, he had like 10 or 15 views for every little stream he did on Fortnite, and I literally posted a time-lapse video of our pool that we had constructed last year, and that went viral. We got 250,000 views of the pool, and he was getting 20 views of his damn streams, and I'm like, kid, this is going nowhere in a hurry. Like, maybe you should stay in school, right? So, like, don't quit your day job yet. Go to school, go to college, and we'll talk about everything later.
And as parents, we know the more you say, no, you can't do that to a kid, the more they romanticize what it is. Go ahead, give it a try, see how it goes. You're still responsible for all of your responsibilities around the house. You are a member of this family. You have chores. You keep your room clean. Your job is to feed the dogs. Your job is to take the recycling out. You have to keep doing that. And the second you stop doing those things that you are supposed to do, you have failed to balance as anybody who has a job and a family and a life and other responsibilities needs to balance, and therefore something needs to go. And unfortunately, this is the lowest thing on the priority. So if you want to do it, show me you can take responsibility.
So, Dad, I'm thinking about dropping out of college because I'm getting really good at this game, and it takes a lot of practice, and I'm not sure I really need to. And look, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they just dropped out of college.
What esport did they play?
But they were passionate about what they were doing, and so that's me too. I want to drop out of college.
I mean, I'll tell them the same thing I tell my kid. Like, every choice you make in life, you have to live with it, right? So you're getting to the point now where you're getting old enough, you make these decisions, you got to live with them. So when you're 25 and you're like, hey, that decision I made when I was 18, where did shit go wrong? Like, kid, you made the decision, you got to live with it now, right? I can only guide you so much, but you got to live with your own life at that point.
Also, Facebook memories will help you understand where you went wrong.
So yeah, we're another 15 minutes gone by. That was a good discussion. And do we have another, say, maybe a last topic to take us through the last 10 minutes or so here? Okay, you suggest and you suggest. So we'll see which one we like here.
It's just, I don't know if it's been a hot topic for a while, but sure debate it. So we all live with that 30%.
I'll tell you where that's going.
Epic and then we're some new rates.
Okay, so don't worry about Epic as much as
Sorry,
we love
they like
Epic.
it.
No, we're doing that one. This is a great one. We don't care about Epic. You do not care about Epic. You care about Google Stadia, and you care about Amazon, who is coming in, and they'll be there the day the consoles launch. And then you care about Bobby Kotick, who's the only person who matters. Okay, Bobby is the only person in this whole discussion that matters. Strauss Zelnick feels the same way, President Take-Two, but Bobby is on record. He's like, I'm playing them off against one another. Strauss was president of 20th Century Fox 30 years ago. Strauss gets windows. Movies have windows, as you know. Movie theater first, then it comes on video rental, then pay-per-view, then streaming video on demand, free TV. There's all these windows. So Bobby's going to say to Google, you want our game? You want the same day as the console guys? 20%. And Google's going to say yes. And Amazon will go, we don't want Google to have it. We want it only for us for streaming. And Bobby will go 10%. And Google and Amazon will say yes. Then Bobby's going to go to Sony and Microsoft and go, I'm giving it to them for 10. Why do you get 30? I don't get that. And Sony will go, pound sand, fuck off, 30%, too bad. And Bobby will go, okay, Amazon gets an exclusive window for 3 months. Amazon, will you take 5%? This is an auction. This is fucking awesome.
And the antitrust regulator will come in and say,
no, they won't.
Amazon and Google, you guys can't offer that,
No,
though,
they
because
can't
that's
collude.
monopolistic
No, you've
anti-competitive
got it.
practice.
Sorry, dude, you've got it completely backwards. Nope. Anything that lowers the take, that's competitive.
Yeah.
Bobby's going to make these
It's also
behemoths.
called dumping, where you lower the prices until they leave the market, and everybody else comes in,
and
and you raise the prices
and
at the
Google and
end.
Microsoft are going to leave the market because they're almost out of money. No, sorry, dude. You're completely wrong. That won't happen.
It's only
So
1%.
I'll just boldly predict the console rates are going to drop to 15%. That they're going to get there, and everybody's going to reach that accommodation, and they're going to be 15%. Mobile is harder because it is a duopoly. It's iOS and Android, and there is no real pressure for those guys. And you're seeing Netflix work around it and Spotify work around it, where they somehow can deliver it to you over the web, and it works with your phone. And I'm waiting. If Apple tries to stop them from doing that, that's antitrust. So that's going to take more years. But great question. You heard it here first, 15% by 2025. It's going to take a while before anybody cares about Stadia
But Epic
or
is already
Amazon.
at 12%, right?
No, that's Epic, but what can Epic deliver to? A PC?
It's platform versus storefront.
Right.
Yeah, it's a platform conversation versus a storefront conversation. And this is where we get into trouble with consumers who are like, oh, Epic's being anti-consumer because they're doing platform exclusives. It's like, no. It's a store. You load it up on the same PC that you load up your Steam games. They're just giving developers more money. And in some cases, you've got indie developers who are coming through and saying, hey, guess what? We had an uncertain future because we weren't sure if our game was going to succeed. We have a minimum guarantee from Epic now. I can guarantee that we are going to more than break even. We're going to be able to make game 2. Game 1 is now locked in.
Try to find Converse All-Stars, Chuck Taylors, or Jack Purcell tennis shoes on Amazon. They don't exist, never have, never will. Why? Because Nike owns both. Because Nike gets full price at Foot Locker. So the store is cutting Nike a break. Better take for Nike, but more dollars to Nike if they keep them off Amazon. Is that anti-competitive? Absolutely. Is that bad for the consumer? 100%. But Amazon can't get them. When the Wii came out, you could not find a Wii on Amazon. No.
There was a long time. Nintendo and Amazon did not get along. No, I got one now. So I think you're right. I think that is the big holdout is consoles, and it's Nintendo and it's Sony and Microsoft. I don't know if Nintendo's going to go anywhere. They don't have to right now. Switch is doing really well.
They don't have any games other than their own.
Well, okay, I don't know if that's true. And
They're getting Overwatch. Did you see that leak yesterday?
I did see that leak. That was really interesting. And I'm not sure if they're getting Overwatch or if the next Smash character is an Overwatch character out of nowhere, and that's where that's coming from. Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to see pressure against Sony and Microsoft, especially as we start blurring the lines between what it means to have a living room console, because that line between PC and console is starting to blur with Stadia and any other streaming platform that comes in, and especially as Microsoft pushes towards xCloud, and then now you've got a console, and they've created their whole ecosystem thing where they're less focused on their hardware, which does expose them to the conversation about platform fee. It's a really interesting this whole thing. There's a lot of moving pieces here, and as we enter the new console generation and streaming becomes a bigger deal and new entrants into the market, it's everything's being disrupted right now, and it's super cool.
Can I make one more bold prediction? Because this is something nobody's calling. I actually think the winner of all of this streaming wars is Sony, and people are ruling them out. But Sony, the prize is PlayStation Plus. And Sony right now has 40 million people paying them $5 a month. So it's 200 million bucks a month of essentially pure profit. If you take that audience and make it 300 or 400 million people and they're streaming, what does Sony care about royalty on the games? They're perfectly happy if they have 300 or 400 million people paying them $5 a month to play multiplayer. So there's a reason they bought OnLive and Gaikai. They have the technology just like everybody else does, and they have consoles, and they have a shit ton more exclusive content than any of these other clowns who think they're getting into this business. So
Are the developers still happy with their share of Sony's money?
I've never met a developer who was happy about anything other than they're all bitter,
They're
nasty.
doomed, right?
They're bitter, nasty little.
I mean, nobody wants to pay somebody just for. It's a perspective thing. It's like, I'm giving Steam 30% just so I can be on their storefront. And the value of that, the perceived value of that, has changed over time as discoverability has gotten more challenging, which is why you see Valve responding with their new ways to address the discoverability. They're kind of playing around and seeing what sticks. And the big conversation that Epic is focused on the 8812 and they're trying to lean away from the stuff like, oh, well, you don't have universal cloud saves yet. That's kind of an issue. You're not offering the same currency options. That's also an issue. There's a variety of things that EGS doesn't do yet, and there's a lot of noise whenever there's an EGS exclusive that's announced. Oh no, it's anti-competitive. I think you're focusing on the wrong thing. There are some people there, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that there are members of the community who are like, okay, here are the 5 features that I use on Steam that aren't on EGS yet, which is why I'm not really happy about these deals. So yeah, I think Epic has a lot of work to do in order to catch up on its infrastructure before we can really have that, and they will, you're right, before we can really have that conversation about, there's no parity in the conversation right now. And this was something that came up at GDC where I went to the Steam business update, and they're like, here are all the things you get that, they didn't come right out and say that Epic isn't doing for you, but it's like, we have our, anti-cheat and anti-piracy stuff that goes kind of across the board, and we have hosting for a variety of things, and we've got the Steam Workshop. The biggest one was, hey, so we move into a market where people don't like to use plastic; they want to buy in cash, and they want to go to the store and buy a code and then come home, and these are things that simply aren't available yet on other platforms like EGS, although they might have caught up by now. But the conversation, the reason Epic is pushing the 8812 conversation is because that's where it's succeeding, with the understanding that it has a lot of work to do to catch up.
On that point, though, would you expect it to go back to 70-30 once they catch up?
Do I think Epic will go back to 70-30? No, I don't think they're going to go back to 70-30. I think that they've kind of reframed the conversation. It would be really challenging for them, although anything's possible. Yeah, I think that's the number, and I think they are looking to push people in that direction because it gives them a competitive advantage, and they know that there are other platforms, Steam included, for instance, Steam cards, right? You go into the store and you buy a card, you give them $50, a game card, right? Steam eats the cost, which is somewhere between 5 and 10% of getting those cards into the market. They just absorb that, and then that money is spent on purchasing games, and that goes to the developer. So that's a harder thing for people to intellectualize and really internalize. Like, oh, so part of my 30% comes back to me for everybody who's purchasing games with game cards. Okay, so I think Epic has wisely for them simplified the conversation so much that there's a lot being lost.
All right, so we're at the end here. We're going to do one more really brief thing here about what's going to be the biggest piece of news in the next, say, by the end of 2020. Biggest piece of news in the game industry. Starting you.
I was actually serious when I started. I think in television, Amico is going to shock people. I mean it sincerely. I know Tommy's here. If you haven't played it yet, do you have it here? It's really fun. I mean, I got a private thing. It's really fun. I think people are way underestimating Tommy, and I think that is going to shock people, how good it is.
I think that just as there was resistance to digital distribution, we're going to see the resistance to subscription gaming completely fade away, and we're going to see that people are starting to loosen their grip on the need to own their media, and ownership of media, even in a digital distribution, when we've reached parity with digital distribution, doesn't mean what it does to have a physical copy of the game in your hand. So I think people are going to further embrace the idea of a subscription model as long as the content stays substantive in the way that Microsoft especially is setting the pace.
Yeah, I think Apple Arcade is going to be a big platform in general that people are kind of not really thinking about a whole lot, but I think it's going to be the big next Netflix of games, ultimately.
All right, so from our side, because we deal with a lot of investment M&A, I think one thing that we're starting to see is actually a lot of investment into China and M&A into China of studios there that are developing content for overseas games. I think over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of Asian companies acquiring, investing in Western devs, but I think you're going to start seeing more and more of the reverse.
For me, I think it's social gaming. One of the last panels talked about community gamers and how they spend more and spend more time, and they're really driven by wanting to play with their friends and their family and people they know, whether they have a history of being gamers, like hardcore gamers, but we're democratizing gaming now, and in the same way that social games on Facebook exploded, we're now at a point, I think, in mobile and other cross-platform opportunities where that can come back to the fore, where it's not just asking somebody to go, milk your cow or mow your field or whatever, or collect your fruit, but actually some meaningful, meaningful activities to get playing together, multiplayer play with brands and experiences that they love.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.